Thank you very much. Perhaps we could kick off by going round and introducing who we are.
Philippe Guillot, I'm in charge of markets at the Autorité des Marchés Financiers. But before that, I spent 25 years in the industry on different roles.
Excellent.
I'm Miro Budimir. I'm involved with the cash markets for Deutsche Börse.
Arjun Singh Michel from the IMA. I'm Senior Advisor, Regulatory Affairs for Capital Markets.
Good morning, I'm Maria Teresa Fabregas from the European Commission, the head of unit of the Securities Markets Department in charge of the MiFIR drafting and negotiation.
Hello, I'm Kostas Botopoulos, the chairman of the Greek Capital Market Commission, a lawyer by profession, and a member also of the management board of ESMA. So both a regulator and a lawyer.
Excellent, great.
Just to put things straight from the beginning.
And a philosopher, I gather, as well. Yeah, Michael set out some interesting themes there that we'll no doubt touch upon on this panel. But perhaps as the nearest we've got as a sort of representative of the key users of the market here, perhaps you could kick off for us, Arjun, with some of the issues that you feel are the top of the list for your user base.
Sure. So insofar as the IMA goes, for those of you who don't know what the IMA is the Trade Association for UK-based buy-side investors. So we represent over 200 investors of varying sizes, from the largest to the smallest. They manage about 7.5 trillion euros out of the UK. Insofar as MiFID goes in particular, there are two issues that we think are very important. One is the issue of surrounding dark pools. The other is on costs relating to access market data. So let's start with dark pools first. I'm not going to sit here and try and defend dark pools because MiFID is the negotiation at level 1 is now done and dusted. So I'm going to talk about implementation of the volume cap mechanism in particular. Firstly, just to put some context around dark pools, during the level 1 negotiation, there was lots of data being thrown around about 40% is dark, 32% is dark, which is utter rubbish. The latest data put out by Thomson Reuters Equity Market Share Report, which is a great resource. On February of this year, the total dark was less than 10% of the EU order book, total EU order book. It was 9.46%. Now, if there was a volume cap put in place in February 2014, the 1.46 percentage point difference, although it sounds relatively small, in absolute terms would have had an adverse impact of almost 12.5 billion euros worth of trades. Now, if we assume that nominal market size per trade is about 7,000 euros, you're looking at about 780,000 individual trades would have been impacted by the volume cap mechanism. So the highest point, according to the latest data, was in October 2013, where dark trades reached 11.88%. And that 3.88 percentage point difference between the 8% cap and the high point was 36 billion euros, which would have impacted 2.1 million individual trades in the dark. Now, where is this going to go? Where are these individual trades going to go? The purpose of putting the volume cap mechanism in place, apart from making the primary exchanges a lot more money, is you want to turn them, we want this liquidity to go lit. It's not going to go lit. It's probably going to go SI instead. Now, the actual post-trade transparency in the SI regime between a sell-side broker and buy-side dealer is actually worse than it is with an automated dark MTF. So what the IMA has called for and continues to call for is the legal mandation of the fixed trade tags 29, 30, and 851. We think if you legally mandate these tags between the broker and dealer, the buy-side dealer will know where these trades have actually gone. And on market data, the outcome on the consolidated tape is disappointing. We were promised a consolidated tape in MiFID 1. It's now the earliest we could possibly get a consolidated tape is 2020. And you have two different tapes, one for equities and one for non-equities or fixed income. There were lots of arguments around why we can't have a consolidated tape, why is it so difficult, and normally arguments around, well, the market in Europe is fragmented. I say rubbish. If you look at data that, again, Thomson Reuters have put out, of all equities traded in Europe, so global equities, including European equities, over 50% is traded on just 3 venues across Europe. And over 75% of all equities across Europe is traded on just 6 venues. I don't see this as a panacea of market fragmentation. So the idea that fragmentation is somehow higher in Europe than it is in the US, and that's why it's difficult to get a consolidated tape in Europe, there's no evidence, I've not seen any evidence to prove this is the case. And just very quick, just do an international comparison between the US and Europe on market data costs particularly. We have one very large buy-side dealer who has a dealing floor in London and in New York. They pay in London roughly about $15,000 a year per dealer on their floor in Europe. Whereas in the US, they pay $800 per dealer on their floor. Now, this difference in price we consider to be staggering. And therefore, on market data and costs related to market data, the IMA is calling for 3 things. 1, we need transparency from the exchanges as to what are the variables that the exchanges use to cost market data. So how have they come up with the cost that they expect investors to pay? The second issue, what we want as investors in the market, is a cap on the total proportion that stock exchanges can make from market data and the cost related to market data. And finally, I would like to call on the Commission, and particularly DG Competition, to conduct a competition review and investigation into this space, because we believe that there may potentially be the hint of market failure in this space.
Right. A lot of issues raised there. Now, before we wade into those, I just want to try and keep it clear in our minds. We had a speaker beforehand who was very specific, and I think principles, whether you agree or not with the model, evidence-based decision-making should be governing regulation. What Arjun has just highlighted is, 1, an issue with dark pool caps, which we need to cover. Secondly, the whole question of the commercial/competition issues relating to market data in the European theatre of operations. If we turn first to the dark trading issue, I'd like your comments, please, on 1, does anyone think they know what dark means and agree on the definition of dark? And 2, if you can define it and agree on a definition, can you actually measure what dark trading is? Philippe, would you like to go first?
I'll try. And so to answer your questions regarding dark, MiFID 2 will, and that being level 2 measures, will give tool to regulators to know what happens on the market in terms of flagging and in terms of calibrating the market. So in terms of flagging, in terms of what happens in the dark, at some point, to go back to what Michael was saying before, whenever you want to look at evidence, what I noticed from his presentation is he's taking 2 pictures. He's taking 2 pictures and he's basing his assumptions on the picture of before 2010, after 2010, and he says, yeah, there's a difference. We can see the difference between the pictures, so it must be good. The decisions that we are taking today will be based on pictures that are taken today, but they will not necessarily be true tomorrow. So we need to be able to carry on calibrating from evidence that will be gathered and so on. So to gather that evidence, we need flagging, we need data, and we need to be able to calibrate. So for instance, Arjun said, everything that is below a certain size will go into the dark through the systematic internalizers. At some point, we need to be able to measure what will go in that, and at some point decide, is it the fair proportion. At the moment, you know that you will not restrict trades to go into the dark, okay, be it at the bottom end of the range under a certain floor, or be it on the top range above a certain ceiling. So the bottom range is trading on small sizes through systematic internalizers. You need to be able to calibrate that range. On a certain ceiling, above certain ceiling, there'll be big blocks traded in dark pools or whatever. You need to calibrate that. At the moment, MiFID II says, okay, what is the floor? The floor is the standard market size. What is the ceiling? The ceiling is the large in scale. And so I heard yesterday talks in that on that same chair, people saying, okay, will SMS and large in scale be adapted and so on? Probably, and if not, then we need the regulators to be able to adapt them. And these are the discussions going through at the moment in terms of level 2. And whatever decisions we will make today will be made on a picture that have been taken today or a couple of years ago. And we may need to readjust that in a couple of years. So, and it's not at the politicians' level that those decisions will be made, because you know that MiFID I was 2004, implemented 2007. MiFID II will probably be 2014, next week, implemented 2017. So you cannot adjust things every 10 years. So you need to enforce regulators with the tools to be able to calibrate market structure, because everything moves.
Okay, the important word I pick up that you use several times there is calibrate, which to me, this is binary. You either know what you're doing or you don't know what you're doing, and you're going to fix it as you go along. Miroslav, what's your view? Do you know what the definition of dark is? Do you know how to count what's in the dark? Therefore, can you make any decisions?
Mm-hmm. Well, I think the level 1 MiFID text is clear on that. It will become even clearer in level 2, as you just stated.
It's clear, but it's going to get clearer.
Yes, it's going to get clearer in level 2. I think it's pretty obvious that the caps appear to be valid for the reference price waiver and for the negotiated trade waivers. So whenever an execution venue wants to take advantage of these waivers, it has to go to ESMA and apply for an exemption. This exemption then will be granted or not granted. And in any case, whenever something in this execution mechanism is executed, then it's clearly counted. But taking this conversation onto a higher level and coming back to your points, Arjun, I think it's meanwhile commonly accepted that in a fragmented trading environment we need transparency, which will heal the adverse effects of fragmentation. And we see that execution supply, we see large orders can have some exceptions from the overall transparency regime, because obviously they need to be protected from an adverse price movement. However, for me, it is very difficult to understand why very small orders need this kind of protection. And as you just said, Arjun, the average trade size in dark pools is around 7,000 euro. It's very difficult for me to understand that these orders need to be traded in the dark, because to me, these orders contribute to price discovery, and you should expose them to the lit. And why is that? Because strict transparency regime is needed by the investor in order to protect the price formation. Because if you execute in the dark, and especially in a fragmented environment, then you have the risk that you will not see liquidity, you will not see where you can execute your order efficiently, and you will have to basically guess where liquidity is by developing dark pinging strategies and even further contributing to the ever more complex trading environment. So in the effect, more transparency is good for the investor base as a whole, probably not for one specific investor for himself, because every single one of us doesn't really want to expose his or her hand to the public. But for the sum of us, for the general public, transparency is good, and therefore it is mandated by European law.
Okay. Maria, dark, do you know what it is, and can you count it?
Well, precisely, this was the issue during the negotiations. Even the industry was not able to put a figure to say to us what was dark. And the figures were so different that the politicians, and we have to say the co-legislators, are democratically elected, and they are there in order to protect the public interest, to put the necessary rules in order to make sure that all markets work for the good of the real economy, decided that it was crucial to introduce a measure that would make sure that at least a percentage of the market would be transparent, pure transparent. And well, there are volume caps, true, but as mentioned, these volume caps apply to reference price waiver and negotiated price waiver. We don't have the large in scale within these caps. No? And the co-legislators decided that for a specific financial instrument, if the dark trading goes above 8%, this is not good in terms of the market of that instrument. This morning, one of the speakers said that the market should be a place with price discovery. This is precisely the important thing. And of course, I agree with Miroslav that mentioned that for some players, of course, they are not happy. They would have liked to continue the same way trading takes place today. But the representative of the European citizens have decided that this was not the right way to follow. And that's the reason why these volume caps have been introduced. That's also, there will be the implementing measures, and Philippe mentioned already, ESMA is working on that in order to develop different thresholds for instance, the largest scale and other measures. But I think that the position taken by the co-legislators about the fact that transparency is good for the markets, and in addition, as you know also, a trading obligation for shares in regulated venues or systematic internalizers has been introduced. Transparency rules for systematic internalizers have also been introduced. Therefore, the will of the co-legislators is precisely to have more information in these markets, not to have the asymmetry of information that exists today.
Okay, so we don't know, but we have to trust in the democratically elected politicians to decide for us, which is an honest answer. I don't think it's a really good answer. What's your view, Constance?
I mean, it's a fair answer as well. We've been talking about fairness a lot. I agree that it needs to be fine-tuned. You were asking what's the difference between clarity now and more clarity later. For example, in the subject we are talking about, this methodology that will be done by ESMA. It's very important to see on what methodology all these calculations are going to be made. I agree on the point with data. Data is one of the big problems out of this whole framework. I think we've calculated at ESMA that we have made up 35 different work streams, as we call them, for gathering of data only for MiFID. So you understand the bulk of the work that is here for us. But maybe, I think, David, you promised that we could have even philosophical type of discussion. I would like to go a little on the principles of what this very important piece of legislation is trying to do. First of all, don't forget that this is the child of the crisis. This regulation is the child of the crisis. This is being done, so much regulation, because I agree that this is a heavy piece of regulation, is being done because of the crisis and because of the problems in markets that emerged as well out of the crisis. So the overarching choice, if I may put so, political choice, you are right, but legislation is first and foremost a political choice. You try to find a solution based on some political assumptions, but political, I hope, in the noblest sense of the term. There are also, of course, particular particular interests in there, but there is also some nobility. So the choice was to have as much trade, both for equity and non-equity, because this is the big novelty of MiFID, in as much as possible regulated venues, regulated or kind of regulated. How can you do that? And again, this is a child of necessity. By transparency. Transparency means that somebody, i.e. the regulator, should know the facts. How can he know the facts? Reporting. So that's the overall scheme of things. But I think the real again important question here is, with all this reporting, with all this striving for transparency through reporting, are we going to have more liquid markets? Are we going to aid in having more liquid? I don't use the word efficient, which has been used by Michael, because efficient is way too general for me. What's efficiency? Efficiency is seen differently from a regulator's point of view and a market point of view. But the question is, after what has happened in the last year, and after the political decision to try and have a common field, again, for equities and non-equities, to extend the scope of what goes in the regulation very much, to create the OTFs, to put high-frequency trading in some sort of regulation, to put position limits as something which is being regulated, to create a small and medium market, a small and medium enterprise market. Is this all going to be, at the end of the day, something which will make healthier and more liquid markets? And we will see. I don't have the answer, of course. From a regulatory point of view, we think that the balance is correct enough, and after the work will be done. And again, it's from an ESMA point of view, and I'm finishing with that, the two very important issues are all the secondary level legislation that needs to be done, enormous amount. We have a year and a half to prepare all that, and all the data gathering, not only gathering, but the data collecting and utilizing. Are we going to be, this is something which is very important to ESMA and to the national regulators. Are we going to use all this data in some intelligent way, or is this going to be only a burden, a cost, and lost along the way?
Algin, before I bring you back in, just while we're on the meta themes here, and you may just say the answer is because you're British and you're bloody awkward, you lot.
Not British.
On the way here, I spent money on currency. I paid 4% commission. And the spread was 30% on the euro. Why is there a whole industry spending its time focusing on slithers of basis points, of market quality, of dark pools of liquidity that no one can even measure? Why is the equity market the brunt of all the regulatory interest? Because this isn't the child of the crisis. And the parent of the crisis was subprime. It was weak fiscal policy in European countries. It was bad banking in other European countries.
But that's not MiFID territory.
It was, but from a rate, if we're down to what the politicians should be interested in, why are we so interested in what an equity market, how an equity market operates, down to the micro level? When everybody heading out of Paris back to a non-EU country is going to get fleeced on FX today. Why is equities the focus?
Well, if I may,
Yeah.
to put the framework of all these financial services that should serve the real economy. As you know now, one of the key concerns in the European Union is access to finance. And capital markets in the EU are less developed than in the US in terms of financing companies. Therefore, we consider that it's very important that these equity markets function well, that they are safe, they are considered kind of responsible markets in order to bring more, let's say, actors.
But if we look at the equity markets, we don't have a 30% spread in Vodafone. we have a 30% spread in the euro, a major currency in euro. So I don't understand why the regulatory focus is not on those markets that are not even markets, that are not efficient by any measure. There are no measures whatsoever. Equities, let's face it, throughout the crisis, in Europe especially, has been almost clean as a whistle compared to some other aspects of the capital markets in Europe. Okay, Arjun.
Yeah, so just on that point, I think whenever we were having negotiations with various people in Brussels during the level 1 negotiation, I think one of the reasons why a lot of focus on equities rather than fixed income was because they didn't understand how fixed income works. They don't understand how currency trading works. It was, so, and Kostas, I think something that you mentioned where you said, you wanted to broaden the scope of equities and non-equities and so on, but we are very concerned of the equitization, as it were, of non-equities. These are two different markets, and therefore putting in place the same transparency regime for non-equities as for equities is dangerous.
It's not exactly the same.
It's certainly
David said it. It's an important word, calibration.
That's right.
There is much calibration, or we have tried to have much calibration in MiFID.
That's right, and I think
it's not the same regime. I want to stress that point.
But I think what made us believe it was when the negotiation was done and the Commission put out its addendum to MiFID. One of the three issues it raised was non-equity transparency. And I think where MiFID has reached on non-equity transparency is a good compromise, and I don't think further work on that issue is required, especially at level 2, now that we have a negotiated agreement at level 1. And Kostas, you also talked about SME markets, or fostering SME markets. The 15 worst affected names by the volume cap mechanism, according to research done by Bank of America Merrill Lynch, the 15 worst names are not FTSE 100 firms. The worst affected would be Carrefour Warehouse, which is a FTSE 250 firm. The top 15 worst affected names, all of them are either FTSE 250 or FTSE small index firms. So you're looking at Carrefour Warehouse, Spirit Pub, Interserve, and so on. It's not the Vodafones, it's not Bayer, it's not Siemens, it's the FTSE 250 and small firms. So if you want to talk about creating an SME market, we should, as you mentioned, Richard, evidence-based decision-making is very important here. And on the meta point of MiFID I was a good piece of legislation. It liberalized European markets and especially allowed for competition amongst trading venues, which is a good thing. It's just like we liberalized the airline industry, which has fostered competition. And that's what MiFID I did. And MiFID II in the industry, we view MiFID II as a reintroduction of a concentration rule by stealth. We do not want a loss. We want further competition amongst the trading venues, because we've looked at data from 2004 up until 2011. You actually see a spike down of spreads after at the date of application of MiFID I. So spreads have narrowed due to the competition that MiFID I brought. So is fragmentation therefore another word for competition? And you talked about small sizes. Why do small sizes trade in the dark? I mean, research by LiquidNet, the research by LiquidNet is absolutely fantastic, and I encourage you to look up the research by them. They put out a monthly dark pool guide, and the research by LiquidNet said that in February 2014, the average price improvement available in the dark in Europe was 14.21 basis points in comparison to sending aggressive orders to the best lit venues across Europe. And when you have a price improvement at that level, there are certainly questions to be asked as to what's happening on lit venues. In addition, on the implementation of the volume cap mechanism, the IMA has always called for and continues to call for a phased-in approach to the volume cap mechanism over a 12-month period. Start with the most liquid, or let's say on the 1st of January 2017. 1st of June 2017, the less liquid, and 1st Jan 2018, the least liquid. It doesn't say no in the text. It does not say no in the text.
I was thinking, is this possible? My first reaction would be that it's not possible from the level 1 text, but Esma will look at that very thoroughly, as ever.
Arjun, if we could, I'd like to turn to your second point, because one of the things that policymakers have encouraged, back to the comparison between Europe capital markets versus US capital markets, is to try and foster some growth, competition. Competition has led to fragmentation. Clearly, it's the result of regulation, but regulators probably are prey to the accusation, as they are currently in the US, that there's actually no long-term blueprint for the markets. What do they expect to happen? What's their vision? Rather than just calibrating things as they go along, what is their vision? Because back to Arjun's point about the need for a consolidated tape, it is remarkable that we're in a situation so long after MiFID I where so many people find it impossible to collate basic data, including regulators.
Exactly.
Yep. I mean, market manipulation, market abuse has probably been made impossible for any one entity to measure. So is it not the case, as Arjun has suggested, that you guys have really got to stop talking about the need for a consolidated tape? Someone's got to bite the bullet and make it affordable.
Yeah, so I will jump. No, one of the big failures of MiFID I is precisely data. Lack of transparency, but lack of quality data. And we all agree that's the reason why MiFID II or MiFIR, it has been decided to agree on measures to foster transparency, to foster level playing field between platforms, because today there are many platforms that are not regulated at all, so it's absolutely necessary to have this level playing field between platforms, and then to improve the data, to introduce rules about consolidated tape. They are there. However, it was decided that at the first stage, we would not go for a single European consolidated tape, because it was decided that, given the fact that through MiFID II, we are improving all the quality standards through ESMA, all this work will be done, we should give still a chance to commercial consolidated tapes, taking into account that the raw material will be better. And if this fails, in 2 years' time, there is an automatic review mechanism by which we would go towards the single consolidated tape provider. And with regard to cost, this element is taken into account because it is mentioned that the data should be provided at a reasonable commercial basis, and ESMA is working in a consultation paper that you will see soon in the coming weeks, months, and we would really urge you and suggest you to contribute to those consultation papers. So in those consultation papers, you will see which are the standards that ESMA will be suggesting as the possible future standards in order to improve. So there is a lot of improvement.
A link with standards is also Arjun's point on using fixed tags to clearly identify destination. I mean, again, in a fragmented world, one would expect this to happen. Now, another principle of MiFID I, which I thought was a wise principle, was that best execution was not a defined, it's an objective, but it's not a definition of best price on any available market year. You've got a policy-based measure of best execution. The whole idea was that customers become more discerning in their use of brokers. That was supposed to be based on clearly documented execution policies provided by traders, which would allow their clients to distinguish which firms they want to trade with. I would suggest there's absolutely no evidence that any regulator in Europe has done anything to ensure that that was implemented across Europe. And again, we're 7 years on.
Excuse me for interrupting. That's ESMA's job, exactly. Yeah, to provide for what we call an integrated approach. That's not to the national regulators. It's up to ESMA to try to fuse all the national practices into as much an integrated approach as we can. And so that's what we are striving to do.
So I think one of the questions the audience may be interested in is as the FCA in the UK has very much led the way in unbundling, for example, which allowed many brokers to choose amongst all these new venues to freely trade, which tended to happen more in the UK, let's face it, than on the continent. Is ESMA going to pick up on the FCA's initiative to look again at conflicts of interest, to look at inducements, and unravel that on a pan-European basis so that there's some consistency here, so that again we don't fall into competition issues for the UK investment management industry.
Of course, if I may, again, this is what we are trying to do, not with 100% efficiency all the time, but the way ESMA is trying to work things out is to, yes, base itself on national experiences, and the FCA is, of course, very important because of its size, because of the market which is behind it, but it's not the only one. And then try to see what are the best solutions, and most importantly, in what way, and this is very difficult, David, in what way could this become a common practice, which is not easy because we have different legal systems, we have different national laws, we have different mentalities, market mentalities and regulatory mentalities. And that's exactly what we're trying to do. And on data, if I may, again, it's one of the issues, but we are coming back to it. On data, we very much welcome, and we've said it, there's been, I think, a public document from both the Commission and ESMA. We are saying that we very much welcome everything that would be professional and scientific work to help us work out the better way to utilize the data which will be gathered. We are not at all closing ourselves and saying the regulators will do everything by themselves. But what we are not on the same wavelength 100% is the feeling that MiFID I was satisfactory. We don't think that MiFID I, again, under the crude light of the crisis, was satisfactory, very simply because it left very much out of regulation. And unfortunately, but this is the truth, we thought, the political and both both political bodies in Europe thought that the more you could try to make things inside the regulation, but again calibrated, and there are big discussions, and in the Parliament one of the things that gave me satisfaction was that from the whole political spectrum, this fact that MiFID is now a calibrated text has been underlined. It's not at all, one size fits all regulation.
If we got add here on the topic of the consolidated tape, that exchanges are already currently working on a joint initiative called MMT, the Market Model Typology. And although we do have a consolidated tape already available today, I mean, look at every vendor and his tape when he provides a list of an ISIN list, you can see where and how trades are made. So with exchange trades and MTF trades, you have perfect quality. I have never heard anybody about poor quality of exchange data. The issue is more the data of OTC, yes. SI, as you have suggested that, Arjun. And in order to fix that, we have started this initiative on the market model typology, and we hope that this is really going to help European investors. On a separate note regarding the cost of data, we have seen a recent study that shows that European market data is slightly higher than US market data. However, there is a good reason for that. The reason for that is that in the US you have 13 execution venues. In the EU you have 65. In the US you have one single market environment, you have one set of rules, you have one language. In Europe you have 28 different countries. So you have totally different economies of scale. You have a mandatory consumption. So if you are a professional trader in the United States,
does anyone here think that the US has got 13 venues versus dozens and dozens? I mean, that's just wrong. Yeah, thank you.
It's the outcome of a recent study that we have seen. So basically, that is the explanation that is not based on our analysis. It's based on the analysis of the study. And I will be very happy to share this with you. So again, regarding the point of the costs, we do not really see that this is big issue compared to the United States. On a separate note, Arjun, regarding the point that you have made on the LiquidNet study.
Sorry, it's Liquid Metrics. That was my mistake. Research done by Liquid Metrics, not LiquidNet. I misspoke.
LiquidNet, the execution platform for blocks. Liquid Metrics, the excellent intelligence provider for data. However, of course, there is some savings if you trade at the dark, but you are proving exactly my point. For any individual investor, it makes perfect sense to trade in the dark and basically to escape the general requirement to contribute to the public. However, as a public, it is not a good service for overall price discovery, because if everybody did that, we would have no transparent marketplace at all, and the very high quality equity markets that we have today with the tight spreads and minimum execution costs would just vanish.
And hence we come full circle, I think, because all the terminology used there in the last few minutes about market quality, efficient pricing, I think they're all concepts we'd love to talk about, we'd love to agree upon, but going back to where we started, which was, Michael Aitken's speech before we came on the panel, I wasn't going to invite Michael to talk, but I don't want him to spoil his chances with a group of customers here. I mean, I get the clear impression that we are a long, long, long way from having data that enables evidence-based decisions to be made in Europe.
By the end of 2016, when MiFID II will be in place, we will start getting this data. And it will be thanks to the legislation. Okay. Because today, MiFID I has demonstrated that the data is not available.
Right. Are we ready for the Skype call? We are. Okay, in that case, I'd like you all to thank the panel here for their contribution.